great pleasure to be able to have NVidia here with us today. I think I kind of mentioned this morning in the intro session that NVidia are a kind of new company for CMAC, and it's been really nice to be able to speak to the experts and Maxine, who we've got in to speak today, a little bit about their hardware and some of the software that they develop. I think it's fair to say probably if you're doing sort of data-driven modelling or AI kind of research, chances are you've probably got NVIDIA hardware somewhere in the hardware stack that's doing a lot of the number crunching for you. And I don't think that's going to be changing anytime soon. The generational steps at NVIDIA just keep jumping, and it's pretty impressive what we can do now. So anyway, Maxine will no doubt talk to us a little bit about that. So just as a little bit of background for Maxine. Maxine is the UK Healthcare and Life Science Manager at NVIDIA. She works with leading clinical research and pharmaceutical organisations to support the delivery of AI to improve clinical pathways and patient outcomes, and also helps the pharmaceutical organisations accelerate their drug discovery pipelines and improve their end-to-end manufacturing. Maxine has 18 years' experience in the pharmaceutical industry, so sort of pharma background, having previously worked at BMS, Astellas, MSD, Teva, and you've been involved in several blockbuster drug launches. Joined NVIDIA from Pierre Fabre, where their melanoma treatment, where she served as oncology account director and responsible for the successful launch of their melanoma treatment. So I don't know if you want to come up, Maxine. Hopefully you're good to go. And I'll get your questions when we're done.
Excellent. That's great. Thanks, Blair. Thanks for the introduction and also the invitation to come along and present to the CMAC audience today. Hope you are all refreshed and you've had your teas and coffees. I know that when I come to visit Blair and the team at CMAC, I'm always inundated with food and refreshments. So hope you are all good to go for this afternoon. So chatting to Blair at lunchtime, and one of the things we were talking about is I would interested in terms of the audience itself of actually who knows NVIDIA. So again, I'm going to a bit of audience participation, just a show of hands of those of you that knows NVIDIA or has heard of NVIDIA. That's actually a lot more than what I thought it was going to be. As Blair said in the introduction, I spent 18 years in the pharmaceutical industry, very much involved with the market access side, so bringing new molecules onto the market. I'm not a gamer. I've never been kind of into gaming or anything like that. So for me, NVIDIA was a completely unknown entity. I had never heard of them before. However, when I started to speak with the healthcare team within NVIDIA, I was blown away with the work that they were actually doing within the healthcare space. So much so that I decided to leave the pharmaceutical industry and join NVIDIA. So this afternoon, what I'd like to just share with you is just a brief introduction about NVIDIA for those of you that are not familiar with it, what we've been doing within the healthcare space over the last 10 years or so, and then also there's been a lot of discussion today, obviously, around big data, in terms of how different organisations work together, how do you collate the data to effectively, whether it's drug discovery or whether it's benefiting patients in clinic. So I'll reference some of the collaborations that NVIDIA is involved with, and there's quite a few of the organisations that are actually part of the CMAC group that we already work with already. And then just very briefly towards the end, I'm going to touch on digital twins, or omniverse is what we refer to it within NVIDIA, because I think in the manufacturing space, this could be something that could really revolutionise the manufacturing space within pharma. So this is NVIDIA. We are silicon-based company out in California. This is our offices here. We have been probably in Silicon Valley now for about the last 15 years or so. I was fortunate enough that I managed to actually get out to Silicon Valley just before COVID hit, so I managed to actually get out and actually visit the office. And as I said, not having known who NVIDIA were, I made the fatal faux pas of asking the Uber driver if he knew where the office was, and obviously turned up and this is what I was faced with, which I think you can agree, obviously, that it's a pretty impressive office, and more so through COVID we've adapted it to even expand it even more. So NVidia itself, what we are known for, this is just a very, very brief history, is that being a child of the 70s and playing Commodore 64 games and things like that, this would be the kind of graphics that you thought was high-tech at the time. And where NVIDIA's heritages came from is gaming, so we were very much known as a gaming organisation. We then took a step back to then think, okay, our graphics, or GPUs as we refer to them, they were really revolutionising in the gaming industry. So we then thought to ourselves, could there be other applications where our GPU technology could actually be used out with just the gaming industry? So we became known as the inventor of the GPU. So gaming is still our heritage, but we are looking at obviously the learnings from the gaming industry and how it could be applied in other industries. So we began to move away and look at other industries that we wanted to work with and where our technology could really help accelerate some of the work. So that then led us into self-driving cars. Obviously, everybody's now heard of Tesla, but at that point, it was still quite unknown entity and the concept of self-driving cars. But our technology underpins a lot of the technology that you see that enables self-driving cars. So that moved us out of being known as just a gaming company, and we started to become known as real leaders in technology, also looking at what's the big problems, what's the difficult things that we could solve with our technology. This is just an example of how far the technology's gone. Obviously, we've seen, the first sort of graphic image of gaming. This is now obviously what the graphics technology can actually now represent within the gaming world. So it's become super realistic, almost to the point that you feel that you're actually in the game itself because it's so real looking. And this was the change and tipping point that we then started to think, okay, medical imaging, could we apply our technology into medical imaging? And that's where we then began to look within the healthcare setting about where our GPU technology could be used within the healthcare. So we then started expanding across various different industries. So we moved away from being just a gaming company. We then started looking at, obviously, the automotive industry. We started looking at things like smart cities. Again, looking at like large cities where you've now got the CCTV camera and things like that. All that technology is all underpinned by NVIDIA. But for me, obviously, looking at the healthcare, the advances that's been made in healthcare, for me personally, are the ones that obviously have really revolutionised the company and took the company onto the next level again. So what have we done in the last 10 years within NVIDIA? So as the graphics have continually evolved and they've got better and better and better, traditionally, all our GPU technology would be embedded within like CT scanners, microscopy, and that's traditionally where our technology was used within. However, as time was going on, the graphics were getting better and better and better, and the data sets were getting larger and larger and larger. Now it's a good problem to have, large data, but also you need large compute to be able to process any of this data. So AI it's not a new concept. AI has been around since the 50s, but the problem with it was there wasn't enough data and there wasn't enough compute to be able to do both together. So as we move along in the last 10 years, this is where NVIDIA looked to then really shift and put a lot of the engineering resources behind healthcare. It wasn't enough just to have compute. We wanted to make it as easier for either new developers or data scientists to be able to use our technology and use it without reinventing the wheel. And we see that quite a lot, and obviously in the academic setting, is you've got certain groups that are doing the same thing. Why not democratize AI? And that's ultimately what we decided to then do. So we started a project called Project Clara, and that was all around medical imaging. Again, looking at the data sets themselves, so 30% of the world's data is actually in healthcare. So again, year on year, you've got this increase of data, more data, which is great, But if you don't have the compute to be able to process the data, then obviously it doesn't benefit anybody at all. So this is where the Clara platform began. So we began very much in the imaging arena, because when we were looking at things like radiology and pathology, huge data sets, huge image sets. So that's kind of like one part of the AI done that you've already started out, and you've got these big data sets to do. So we developed the NVidia Clara platform to allow researchers to actually be able to analyse these data and images. And as you'll see, obviously from the imaging one here, the quality of the images are obviously far superior than what you would have with just like a normal 2D or 3D image. So again, it was allowing clinicians to actually make more accurate diagnosis. I think initially when I was thinking about leaving the pharmaceutical industry, and I did speak to some clinicians about, artificial intelligence, what's your thoughts on it? It was kind of half and half. It was, that's like, 10, 20 years out. I definitely think because of COVID, this has accelerated everything now. People are looking at ways that we can help diagnose patients quicker, faster, and easier. And I think with COVID as well, it's kind of removed a lot of those barriers, because we're all acutely aware of the waiting times to see a consultant. I think in Scotland just now, the waiting times for a dermatologist is 5 years. So this is where we've been starting to see people looking at things like the Clara platform as a way to help triage. How do you get to those patients early, rather than obviously having patients waiting horrendous amounts of time. And when we're looking at things like, if it's a skin cancer patient, they don't have 6 months to a year to wait to be able to see a clinician. Whereas if you were using, obviously, the imaging and the AI to help triage those patients, then it just means that you can actually identify those patients earlier in the pathway rather than later, which is obviously crucial. So we started building out the imaging in Clara. Then all of a sudden, genomics kind of started exploding. So again, huge data sets, but having the ability to actually do whole genomic sequencing, which some of the organisations we work with, but it would be taking days to do it. Whereas with the NVidia technology, we were able to actually do whole genomic sequencing in literally a couple of hours. And I'll touch on one of the examples of one of the organisations we work with that do that. So then drug discovery started kind of exploding as well around, do we need to do all this in a wet lab? Can we not, do the simulations computationally first? Drug discovery is obviously the most expensive asset to any pharma company, as you all well know. And in terms of the success rate of obviously identifying a molecule that actually hits it onto the market is pretty low, and it goes into the tens of billions of pounds. So this is where the pharmaceutical industry started paying attention to what we were doing with our GPU technology, and started thinking, well, could we start simulating some of these molecules computationally, get to the point that we've got one or two that look really, really suitable candidates, and then move them into the wet lab. So again, that's been the last 3 to 5 years. That trend is starting to really kick in now. I think the pharmaceutical industry was a bit kind of reluctant about it, but now they're actually seeing that actually you can bring a drug to market within less than a year if you were obviously using things like AI to be able to identify candidates quickly. And then other areas that started kind of popping up as well was NLP. I think it was touched on this morning, the huge data sets that we're looking at for NLP. One of the use cases that we're working with a company at the moment is around adverse event reporting. Obviously, if a patient's yellow carded and it goes into one of your organisations, that takes a huge amount of time internally to actually be able to process adverse event reporting. NLP can do that in a matter of minutes. It's built to then obviously deal with the medical language. It can sift through thousands of journals and articles quickly and look for different, obviously, side effects and things much quicker than a person just doing it on their own would be able to do it. So this is where we've built this whole foundation about making it easy for people to do AI. Because if it's complicated and it's hard to do, people just won't really want to do it unless they've got a real passion about it. So the more we can make it easier with building all these software tools, on top of obviously the hardware that sits underneath it. It just means it's easier for people to go in and pick out models that they want to train. And just, as I said, democratizing AI and making it easier for everyone. So, as I said, I touched on radiology. This is where we've seen the first of AI actually happening within healthcare. Huge data sets, huge amount of, obviously, compute required to actually process these data sets. But this is where we were seeing the emergence within the medical imaging world, as using, obviously, things like radiology libraries to then be able to triage patients. We then started seeing things like people carrying out AI on, for example, scans of the brain. So as you can see here, the top one is without any AI, and the bottom is AI. So it just means that visually it's easier for clinicians to pick up on any abnormalities rather than having the trained eye having to do it. And what I always say is clinicians can be sometimes a bit funny about AI. I think they think a robot's going to turn up in the clinic and going to replace them in terms of the job that they do. But for me, it's all about it's assisting with the diagnosis, it's helping. As much as any radiologist and pathologist on a good day, there will always be things that will miss, and they're quite happy to put their hand up and say that they don't always get everything. So by having this almost as a sort of a support tool, it just means that it's reducing the risk of obviously any of these patients being missed, and working with the clinician as a way to support them. Again, pathology was one that we've really seen exploding, being able to help the clinicians diagnose things like breast cancer. I'll flick through some of these. The other huge one that we're seeing at the moment is retinopathy, so being able to obviously diagnose. They say that the eye is the window to the soul, but it's also the window to comorbidity as well. So if you're able to obviously use AI to then detect some of the abnormalities within the eye, then again, it just means that you're being able to potentially diagnose some conditions that aren't physically presented yet to the body itself, but through the eye you can start looking at things like, cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes, all through obviously the imaging of the eye. So I'm working with a local ophthalmology company who ideally really want to get that when you turn up to your boots the chemist, you would go in and almost do your eye test yourself, and then it would flag it as to say, yep, normal, no, we want you to come back, or no, you have to go and see an ophthalmologist straight away. So again, it's just making it easier for patients to actually start accessing this technology, because the earlier you can diagnose anything, obviously it's much better for patient outcomes. I touched on genomics, I'll come back to that one as well. So big AI in terms of we've seen all this explosion happen in the last, I would say 5 years, it's really started to take off. And where we as a company engage within healthcare is we call it the 3-layer cake. So we've got the hardware element of it. Blair mentioned that probably most of you, if you are doing any data science or any research, you're probably using some GPU from NVidia of some sort. So we really try and work on anyone that is using our technology. First of all, what's it being used for? What's the use case? Why are you using GPU technology? Again, within our healthcare team, we started out quite small within Europe, and I think we started out, there was about 5, now there's 35, of which probably 90% are engineers, and they're engineers from healthcare. So we have an expert in NLP, we have an expert in radiology and pathology, we have an expert in genomics. So these are people that are top of their game and know exactly how the technology should be used. So that's the first way that we try and work with people is if our technology is being used, what's it being used for, and can we help somehow either accelerate pipelines or some of the work that's there, or just even give advice in terms of how best to run our technology itself. The second part of the cake, so to speak, is the software, which I referred to earlier with Clara, making it easy for people, giving them the tools, taking away the barriers for stopping people actually doing their life's work, and making it as easy as possible. So all our software is all open source through what we call our NGC container. So our engineers are constantly working all the time to come up with new software, new types of algorithms, and it's all put into our NGC container, which is all open sourced. And then the last layer of the cake is something that I think NVidia has done very, very well, is that we've looked to seek lighthouse engagements across healthcare. So what we wanted to understand is, what are the problems, what is the problems that pharmaceutical manufacturing companies are faced with? Is it data? Is it data collection? What is that? So we've really listened to what's going on within the healthcare market, all the way through from what's happening in the hospital setting, through to drug discovery, and then more recently we're really kind of focusing on manufacturing side as well. So we've really listened to what people were saying, listened to the help that we were looking for, and then we've very much linked in with a lot of these organisations. As I said, a few of obviously that you'll recognise on the screen already, GSK and AZ being the main ones in the UK that we were engaged with. So why should we care about AI within healthcare? I think we've seen it's gone from not just being medical imaging. We're now looking at things like natural language processing. We're looking at big chemical models, more and more and more and more data, which is great, but you need to obviously have the expertise and the compute to be able to actually process any of that data. However, when it's done right, it can really have, drastic impact in terms of bringing new molecules to market, diagnosing patients earlier, genomic testing. So, the health of the nation, this is why we should care about AI within healthcare. So these are a few examples of the collaborations that we've got. So probably going back about 5 years ago, NVidia started a conversation with King's College London. They are, I would say, the global pioneers within AI. They are doing stuff that is just so far out. So we had a conversation with them around, okay, AI is all very good and well in the academic setting, but if it's not going to make a difference to patients' lives, why is any of us doing this? Why are we here? So we joined forces with King's College and we started working with them on an AI platform. So that's been over the last 3 years or so. So we've tried it out, we've tested it in the academic setting within King's College to obviously test out the concept of, does AI actually work within healthcare? And as I said, the things that they're doing, so we started off with like stroke, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. We've now got to the point now that KCL have trained all their models now, and now it's at the point of actually deploying it actually in a hospital setting. So this year, over the next 12 to 18 months, this is where it's now going to move from being, well, that's all very great and it's all a good theory, but we're actually starting to move it out into the clinical setting, and this is where I think we're really going to start seeing AI coming at the point of care. One of the other collaborations that we've done with King's is called MONAI. So again, we were seeing it quite a lot in the academic setting that people were doing the same kind of thing, but not very, good at sharing a lot of the models and everything that we were doing. So we come up with the idea of MONAI, which is a medical open network for AI. So we went out to the clinical community, we went out to the research community to say, let's democratise AI. There is no point in, King's College doing one thing, Strathclyde doing something else. That doesn't benefit anybody, it doesn't benefit particularly patients. So we've come up with MONAI. So we have our engineering team who will work with some of the lead clinicians. They'll also work with the researchers as well. So anything that we come up with, any algorithms or anything, is all put into MONAI. It's all open sourced. So again, it's just making it accessible for people to actually start doing AI and start doing it, getting the models, doing the training and everything as quickly as they can. And the ultimate goal would be obviously to use these models to the point of actually deploying it out within the actual healthcare setting itself. So this is something that we're very much sort of supporting to democratise AI. This is just a few examples of who feeds into MONAI. KCL is obviously the one that kind of championed it, but we've also got, for example, Pathlake, representing obviously the pathology side of things. The plan would be in Scotland, we're going to have iCare feeding into this as well. And then we also have the link into Genomics England. We've got pharmaceutical representation. And we've got the likes of GSK and AstraZeneca feeding into this as well. So it's all, as I said, making it as easy for people to access the algorithms and start doing the training. I touched on the genomics side of it. Oxford Nanopore is one of our main clients. They started out a very, very small company. They were actually part of our Inception programme. So Inception is we very much look to the startup community and we acknowledge that they are so vital and they're so important, and I think that's what's driven innovation. So Oxford Nanopore were one of our Inception partners, and they have scaled like phenomenally quickly. So they were doing genomic sequencing, and they were one of the first, I think, to look at, by using NVidia GPU technology, this can help us do whole genomic sequencing in a matter of hours rather than a matter of days. So Oxford Nanopore were instrumental in doing a lot of the COVID testing. They'll go out to like Africa, they'll do, if it's like malaria, they'll sequence there. All our technology is all underpinned with all the sequencing that they're actually doing. I think what's helped as well is that the cost of genomic sequencing has drastically come down. I mean, it used to be thousands upon thousands of pounds to do genomic sequencing. The cost of it, I think, because the compute ability has increased, so it means that you're not running things for days on end. It's running in a matter of hours, which again has helped lower the costs. So through time, what we would ultimately like to see is the likes of like Oxford Nanopore supporting like precision medicine. So you're actually getting to the point that drug A is suitable for patient A rather than let's give it to everyone and see. So that's, I think, going to be a direction of travel for Oxford Nanopore. And then specifically in the pharma industry, we very much have been involved with Melody. So Melody is the EMEA consortia. You can also see all the companies that are involved in that. Again, that was all around how do companies share data without actually sharing their own data. So this is where the concept of federated learning had kind of evolved from, about being able to come together as a group of companies and have access to a training set of data, but not having obviously all the complications of, well, that's my data and that's not your data. So this is where Melodies really has came from. And again, they've been very much in a kind of training mode the last couple of years, but I think now we're at the point now that some of these models are mature enough. But I think it's a great way to showcase how pharma companies can come together and can actually do something that's going to benefit everyone. So about 18 months ago, we announced a partnership with GSK. GSK is building an AI drug discovery lab. They are very much leading the way, along with a few other companies around, let's reinvent the way that we actually look for new drugs. As I said, traditionally it would be wet lab, whereas the likes of like GSK are thinking, okay, we need to start using the technology and we need to start being able to run these simulations at a compute level before we're even thinking about putting anything in a wet lab. So we very much partnered with them. We have one of our engineers that's actually sits within GSK 2 days a week, works with the data science teams there, again, looks at their pipelines that they're doing, can help them with any kind of training aspect. But again, it's about understanding what it is that you're trying to do and bringing our expertise in to try and get the best out of the technology as possible. We announced just over a year ago, our CEO has looked at the UK as really being leading within healthcare. He is quite a character. I don't know whether anyone will have seen any of the kind of, or we have GTC conference. He's quite an interesting character. So he announced that he wanted to build the largest supercomputer for healthcare, and the next minute we found out that it was going to be the UK and he wanted it built in the UK, which was great, which was amazing, but he kind of wanted it done in like 2 months. Typical CEO timescales expectations. But the ethos behind it was he looked at the UK as really leading the way within healthcare, and he wanted to give back to the community and give back into the UK economy. So we built Cambridge One. So the 6 founding partners, as you can see here, are AstraZeneca, GSK, King's College London, Guy's and St Thomas and Oxford Nanopore. These were the ones that we looked at that were really using our technology and really scaling quite significantly using our technology. So the purpose behind Cambridge One is it's to do grand challenges. It's not about, well, we could do that internally, but we'll just go on Cambridge One. This is to solve real huge challenges within healthcare. As an example, King's College London, the project that they're doing on this is the flying brain. So they're creating a synthetic brain. Again, that will be used for helping with drug discovery, looking at things like Alzheimer's, what accelerates Alzheimer's in some patients and not others. So it's big, grand scale challenges that would be, requires that amount of compute to do it. We've also, as I said, we've seen an explosion within the startup community. So the companies just at the top there, we're seeing that these are the kind of new pharma companies on the block. So they are very much using our technology to identify potential candidates, and then they will be looking to either partner with a pharma company or obviously then look to then sell the patent on to another pharma company. But the startup community are scaling super quick, more than probably the actual pharma companies. They are really investing quickly, and they really see the benefit of obviously using technology to get to suitable candidates. Another example of what's been run in Cambridge One is a project that's been run by AstraZeneca. So they are very keen in looking at NLP. So we have got MegaMobart, which is a specific NLP model that we created. So they are running that on Cambridge One. And what we're finding is NLP takes up a huge amount of compute to be able to do it. You need big compute to be able to run NLP effectively. But again, the benefits to the pharma industry have been able to obviously run these kind of models. It's just obviously hugely beneficial to be able to do it. And then lastly, I just wanted to sort of touch on NVidia Omniverse, which I think would probably be most relevant to this audience today. So Omniverse, we're seeing this, everybody's talking about digital twins. So we're seeing now that there's a real, this will be the next phase, I think, for NVidia in terms of the work that we are doing. So looking at, for example, the factory of the future, how do you then have a digital twin of the factory of the future? One of the other areas that we're looking at is we're currently working with, I think it's the Met Office, we're building a digital twin of the world to be able to then simulate weather predictions as well. But for me, like speaking with Blair around the possibilities of this being used within the manufacturing space within pharma, I think there's a huge amount of capabilities that the digital twins could offer. One of the one that's referenced most in all our things at the moment is we've got a partnership with BMW. So BMW came to us and they said, we want a digital twin of our factory. So we've worked with them over the sort of last 12 to 18 months, and that's what we've done. We've built a digital twin of the BMW factory. So any changes, any modifications, any new car specs or anything coming through, they can model it obviously in the digital twin and then see what the impact would be actually in the factory itself, rather than obviously making changes to the factory. So there's huge amounts of learnings, I think, from looking at what BMW have done. And granted, obviously, it's a car manufacturer, but I think a lot of the principles behind what they've done and how they're using digital twins could be applied looking at the manufacturing space. I think the light bulb moment for me was when thinking about, for example, the companies that are making the COVID vaccines. How do you make it as quickly and efficiently and streamlined, and obviously keeping your costs down as well? And I think things like the Omniverse is a perfect platform to be able to then test out these new drugs coming out to market, or if there's changes that you want to make within the actual factory itself. So that's just a quick whistle-stop tour of some of the things we do in NVidia. I think you'll see it's quite broad in terms of, I could probably speak here for about 2 hours about some of the things that we do, because it is so wide. But I think the take-home message is that AI, I think, is here to stay. And I think given the right expertise and the right support, then definitely within healthcare, I think it can make a huge difference for the lives of patients, which obviously everybody, I think, would all agree that that's what we're all kind of striving towards. So thank you for your time. Happy to take any questions. My email's there as well. If you want to reach out, if there's any sort of projects that you are interested in doing with NVidia, we're always looking to collaborate on new ideas. We're always looking at things, big things that we can work on, exciting things, but also things that haven't been done before. We like to push the boundaries and do things that nobody else has done as well. So thank you, everyone.